MarkRogersTV heading out to the Pac-12 for the first big in-conference matchup of the season, with Stanford hosting USC on Saturday night. We bring in Nick Dempsey, who this is kind of right in his wheelhouse. Conquest Chronicles, Rule of Tree, he's got it all covered for us. He's the right guy to go to all the time, but especially for this matchup. Nick, it should be a pretty good ball game if USC gave us any hints of any kind of life last week in disposing of Utah State 45-10.
Yeah, I think USC made a huge leap from the week of 2 weeks of preparation for Alabama to the week of preparation for Utah State, which is good. I think they're going to need to have another big week of practice this week to get better, because Stanford is not Utah State. So they're going to have to do a lot better. There's still a lot of mistakes they need to clean up.
So the USC offense, of course, stampeded by Alabama the previous week, really showed us nothing, virtually nothing. A couple field goals, couldn't get into the red zone. I think we talked about it before we came on, and you mentioned the one play in the red zone penalty, and then suddenly you're out of the red zone, and that was it for the night. Of course, the success came against Utah State to a certain extent. Your thoughts about some of the keys for the Trojans on offense, with Max Brown at quarterback for his third start against always a formidable Stanford defense?
Yeah, I think it starts up front for USC, that offensive line. Which offensive line are we going to get? The unmitigated disaster we saw against Alabama, or are we going to get the more cleaned up, marginally more disciplined version we saw against Utah State? They're going to need to be very good, because, as you said, Stanford loves to win the box on defense. They played big. They had, I want to say, 8 sacks against Kansas State, so they're bringing it on D. So this is going to have to be a very, very good evening for the USC offensive line. If they don't get that, you kind of throw everything else out the window, much like the Alabama game, that there's not going to be any run game, any plays developing. So we're going to need to see which USC O-line they're dealing with. They lost their starting center, Toa Lobadan, before the Utah State game. He's done for the season. They had to deal with an ejection from Adoga at Utah State, but he will be there for the game. So they've got to step up. And if they don't, that's pretty much going to be it. I don't see a way they can win if that offensive line does not continue to improve greatly. If they do, however, it'll be interesting to see. The matchup to watch is particularly for USC, is always going to be JuJu Smith-Schuster. What's your answer for him? He's one of the best wide receivers in the country. They're going to get to him. Alabama shut him out. Utah State, not so much. So if the USC can get the pass off and the line can hold up well, how does Stanford respond? Stanford's secondary was supposed to be a bright point coming in this season. They're much more experienced. They were very young last year and had to play a lot of bend but don't break. We only saw them one game against Kansas State. There was a couple of pretty boneheaded pass interference calls and no calls. I believe there was outright tackles on some of those plays. That's not going to fly against JuJu. I mean, you can tackle the guy, but they're going to get the 15-yard line. So going to need to see a huge step up from the Stanford DB. That's going to be interesting. And if they can respond and can kind of lock down JuJu Smith-Schuster, then USC is going to need another receiver or tight ends or somebody to step up, because it can't be like last season where if you lock down JuJu Smith-Schuster, there's just no passing game. Last year, Cody Kessler keyed in on JuJu Smith on pretty much every play. You can't have that. You're going to have more targets. So that's somebody in the USC receiving corps is going to have to step up and start making plays. Probably several somebodies. So that's going to be huge. They got the O-line. You've got to have receivers step up. An interesting situation with the quarterbacks. It seems like this whole quarterback situation at USC just keeps surprising us. It was supposed to be a done deal back in spring, and then they said, oh, no, it's a big competition between Brown and Darnold. And then 2 weeks before the Alabama game, it was definitely Max Brown. He was the starter. And now Darnold has played in both games, and not in garbage time. He came in the first half, I believe, against Utah State to get reps. So I don't know. I don't think it's still a competition. But it seems like Clay Helton is comfortable with using two quarterbacks in the same game and switching up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the Stanford game will be really telling. If it's close and we don't see Darnold get reps or get experience, as Helton said, that's why he's bringing him in, then I think it's pretty much a done deal. It's Brown all the way. But it will be interesting if they don't get the ball moving against Stanford's defense. Darnold does bring in a mobile quarterback element, so you'll want to keep an eye on that. But I think Max Brown will, or at least should, go all 60 minutes. And then after that, USC in the red zone. Helton has placed a heavy focus on getting the offense going in the red zone. They like we said earlier, they had pretty much nothing in the red zone against Alabama. They did better against Utah State, but now they're going to have to go up against Stanford again. And these two teams play each other insanely close, or have seemed to in the last few years. So you can't afford to leave points on the field and start taking field goals. So USC is going to have to, I think, pleasantly surprise us in the red zone if and when they get there.
Brown and Darnold both had efficient outings against Utah State, if not explosive. 2 touchdown passes for each. When you talk about JuJu, he caught 7 against the Yankees for 2 touchdowns. Darius Rogers would appear to be the guy that would most need to step up as that complementary threat. He caught 7 for 82 against Utah State. The USC defense, so if somebody didn't watch the Alabama game, you would think they gave up 52 points. They're trash. That's not how I saw it. I think it's just a situation where they were rock solid, stonewalling Alabama for a quarter and a half. There were about 7 minutes left in the first half before Alabama scored an offensive touchdown. So for the first 22, 23 minutes of game time, they were playing on par with the Alabama defense. And they were put in some bad situations by the offense, 3 and out, and they continued to stop the Alabama offense. I think it was just one of those situations where you're going to give up big plays to 5-star athletes at some point, and then they just caved in, and maybe they gave up. I don't want to speak to that, but I thought it was a pretty impressive defensive performance when the game mattered. And obviously, based on what they did against a Utah State that's pretty pedestrian, but still capable, they put up another solid effort in regards to not giving up much of anything.
Yeah, the USC defense definitely surprised the heck out of me personally. That defensive line was supposed to be the weak point of this team. They lost, I think, 5 guys to graduation on that, just on the line. So, and the one guy that had any sort of discernible starts, Kenny Bigelow, he went down for the season in spring ball. So they were supposed to be the weak spot, and the big concern was Alabama's running game and Christian McCaffrey was going to run right through these guys. First quarter and a half against Alabama, they hung in there. They really did. They really surprised, but they just on the field too long. You're right. It wore them down. Because not only are they going up against 5-star athletes, running backs and quarterbacks, they're also going up against 5-star offensive linemen. So they're getting beat up and beat up and beat up. Eventually the dam's got to break, especially if it feels like they're the only ones actually playing this game. So they made improvements against Utah State. But again, Christian McCaffrey and Love in particular, those guys are elite. They're fast. We know what McCaffrey can do. We've seen a little bit of what Love can do. So even if they have a great game, those big players are going to break out. Kansas State brought 7 or 8 guys in the box against McCaffrey and bottled him up a little bit, but he still broke for a couple of big plays. When that happens, and it's almost certainly going to happen if history is any indication, this defense has got to kind of keep their composure, hang in there, and keep fighting, because McCaffrey, even if you have an answer for him, he's still going to put up points. And when that happens, you can't just let go like they did against Alabama. Now, hopefully, the offense has a pulse this week, and isn't leaving them hanging 3 and out every time. But they're going to have an answer for McCaffrey and Love, and that answer isn't necessarily keeping them to under 100 yards and 0 touchdowns. That answer is like you've got to at least contain him, make him beat you with the pass. I think if you're USC, you're very excited at the prospect of Ryan Burns throwing to a receiver covered by Adoree Jackson. I think that's exactly where you want to be if you're USC's defense. But if they can't stop McCaffrey and Love, there's going to be very little reason to pass the ball. So that's going to be interesting. I feel like at some point, Adoree Jackson, one of the fastest guys in the country, and Christian McCaffrey, I feel like at some point, Adoree Jackson is going to be sprinting across the field trying to catch up to McCaffrey at some point to bring him down on a big play. I feel like that's probably going to happen at least once, maybe multiple times. But if you so you also want to see from Stanford's offense, Ryan, their quarterback situation is actually just as curious. They definitely do still have a quarterback competition going on. So we've got 4 quarterbacks we could see in this game potentially. Burns is the starter as of now, but both Burns and Chris played. I would like to see Burns have a stronger command of the playbook. He only had a handful of passes with easy routes, not a lot of reads against Kansas State. He looked very good, particularly since Kansas State dedicated 7 or 8 guys to the box. So you take the easy routes, and he hit throws, but USC's defense is going to start taking those away. They've got game film now. He's going to have more plays in his playbook in order to move the ball through the air. If he can't, then they can dial in on Christian McCaffrey and Love, and you've got Stanford one-dimensional. They still have a pretty good shot if they're one-dimensional, but Burns is going to have to start doing better. And if not, Keller Chris is right behind him, and Keller Chris adds a bit of mobility. So it's tough to gauge. You got a game plan for a lot of things. If you're USC's defensive coordinator, Clancy Pendergast, you got a lot going on that you're going to have to figure out. And Stanford, too, had a little bit of problem in the red zone. They had to kick a lot of field goals. They left a lot of points on the board. And like I just said, these two teams historically have played each other very close.
So Ryan Burns hit 14 of 18 passes in the opener against Kansas State, so he looked like the real deal. And I know we talked about it, Nick, after the game that they gave him some safe throws for the first 4 or 5 passes. And then he really started to rip it downfield and make some impressive throws. So I don't know that he could have played any better. So if it's still a quarterback competition, I understand we don't see what's happening in practice and don't know the true abilities of these teams. But he certainly looked the part in game 1 against a capable Kansas State defense. So that brings us to special teams, which isn't so special sometimes when we're setting up certain matchups. But in this one, you've got special players on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, you got 2 of the best return men in the country. We've mentioned them both. You got number 2 for USC, Adoree Jackson, and then you've got, of course, Christian McCaffrey for USC. Both of them have already taken a kick to the house. Only Adoree is counted. Unfortunately, there was I believe it was a block in the back call that brought Christian McCaffrey's back. But it was one of the McCaffrey. If you didn't see the highlight, it was great. He was like stopped inside the 5 or 10. They had him. Nobody wrapped up. He just kind of spun off and then just went. He was gone. It looked like, oh man, how are they going to dig out from their own 4-yard line to? Oh well, we're kicking off now. Unfortunately, got called back, which was too bad. But I believe David Shaw referred to it as the best kick return that doesn't count he's ever seen, or something like that. So expect some big plays on special teams for sure. And when that happens, again, gonna have to keep your composure. These 2 teams, when they played historically, there's been big momentum swings. I know it looked like USC got thumped in the Pac-12 championship game last year by about 3 scores. But it was pretty even going into the 4th quarter. In fact, I believe USC had the lead in the Pac-12 championship game. When you've got these big-time playmakers, you're going to get huge momentum swings, and it's going to come down to you got to keep your composure. It'll also be interesting to see sort of how play calling is impacted. When you're kicking off to Christian McCaffrey, maybe you get a little more aggressive on whether or not you go for it on 4th down, or vice versa with Adoree Jackson. So that could bleed into other phases of the game, but I would not be shocked if both teams got a special teams touchdown at least. Just so good, both these guys. It's going to be interesting. I think whoever, like most games, whoever makes the least mistakes, and I think whoever keeps their composure the most is going to win, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of wild swings. Now, having said that, I'm sure now will look ridiculous and someone will just come out and dominate. But this is what it feels like. It feels like it's going to be pretty tight. I would expect a lot of points. There just seems to be too many playmakers on the field. And again, it comes down to, can you contain McCaffrey? I think that's the first key to this game. It was reported last year in the Pac-12 championship when these two games went on. Justin Wilcox, then defensive coordinator for USC, was heard in the booth from the press box. Heard him screaming out, "Who the heck's job is it to cover McCaffrey?" That can't happen. That's like the first thing you have to answer, not trying to scramble to figure that out in the fourth quarter of the conference championship game. So if they get that figured out, force Stanford to do something else. Shaw said, we know at some point we're going to have to win a game without McCaffrey. So, find that answer, like make it this game if you're USC's defense. And if you're USC's offense, find somebody, get the running game going, get all of the running backs you have, get them going, get plenty of receivers involved, spread the ball out, and force Stanford's DBs to try to beat you. And I think whoever keeps their head the most, I think is going to win this game. If I had to guess right now, I feel like Stanford probably wins. They're vastly better coached, and they are at home. But when these two teams get together, you just gotta watch and enjoy.
And excluding one play, I think Kansas State was able to do that against Christian McCaffrey. They keyed on him. They took him out of the game. He still got his carries and got some yardage, but he was around 85 yards until he hit the home run with about a minute left to seal the game. And he did passes out of the ball game, but that was clearly the Wildcats' purpose, and they pretty much hit the goal until late in the game. And USC's got better athletes and a little bit stronger front to do that. My thoughts here is that I see in Vegas that Stanford opened as a 6.5-point favorite. The line's jumped to 8.5. They've got the 2 weeks off since the previous game against Kansas State. And the initial thought there is, coaches are going to game plan. They're going to open up the playbook. They're going to run a bunch of crazy things because they've had all this time. Not so much for Stanford. I just think this is about rest, and even more so, it's about, this is a very fundamentally sound team, a team that relies on technique and doing all the right things, getting out of the stance properly, the linebackers reading the flow of the offense correctly, and the blocking's doing all those little things that they tighten up and do even better when they've got all that practice time to prepare for an opponent. So that may not be a good sign for USC as well.
Yeah, it's really weird how you want to look at it. That bye week is just, I think, is unfortunately timed because they're going to have to go 11, maybe 12 straight weeks if they make the Pac-12 championship where they're going to get any time off. If you're the type that thinks rhythm and just staying in, getting live reps is important, this bye week is maybe not the best time for Stanford. If you're somebody like Shaw, who, yes, fundamentals, I believe he says we're practicing good habits is his favorite phrase. So this is a great time then to have it to clean up all those little mistakes that'll kill you that we saw in the first game against Kansas State. Clean that up because right now we're not just looking at USC. They got USC at home the following week to go down to UCLA. Then they've got Washington State, and Notre Dame, all in the next 5 weeks, starting this week. So. And this is their bye week. That was their last chance to get things right. Now they go into this hard gauntlet. So just USC is like the kickoff. So I think they use their bye week well to clean up the fundamentals. You might still see some trickeration from Shaw just because he likes to throw it in every once in a while. But he's bringing the fundamentally sound team to the farm. And USC, I think, definitely needed the live reps. I think a bye week after that Alabama debacle would have been disastrous. So it's probably good schedule-wise for both teams, but this one should be interesting. 8.5, I think that's probably what Vegas wants. I think that'll get a lot of bets on both sides, but I'm excited for this one, Mark. I really am. I think this is going to be a good game.
Yeah, Trojans and Cardinal get together at Stanford in one of the more heated rivalries in the Pac-12. So people outside the Pac-12 think USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal, of course. Those are the headliners, but there's been a lot of bad blood in this series. in recent years. Nick Dempsey, Conquest Chronicles, Rule of Tree, helping us out on Stanford USC, one of the big matchups on Saturday. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Of course, Mark, anytime.